And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Tom Fornelli. That's Danny Cannell. That's Bud Elliott. I'm Chip Patterson, here to get your weekend started right. That's right. It is the big old bag of mail. Like so much joy comes from diving into the big old bag of mail. I'm, got my feelings hurt a little bit, but that's okay. That's what happens when when you get the Georgia fans all riled up and mad, and that's okay, But I appreciate all of the interesting questions. The conversations that we have sometimes lead you to ask even better follow-ups, and we are going to get into some of those today, along with some others that stand out for potential interesting conversation. So let's begin with sort of a historical, wide open, throw everything out there. This question comes from Hugh. Hugh asks, which year in the BCS era do you wish there was a 4-team playoff?
Simple and to the point.
That's very simple and to the point.
He didn't blow smoke. He didn't tell us how much he hated Danny at first, but likes him. He didn't tell us he thinks Bud's a great addition to the show. He didn't tell him that I'm not as annoying to him as I used to be. He just got to the question. I don't even know why it's on the show, Chip. He didn't kiss anybody's ass.
He didn't suck up enough to get included.
I don't know.
Is what you're saying?
I don't know if I want to answer this question anymore.
All right, well, fine. I'll get it started. So 2004 and 2011 are the ones that stand out, right? Because 2004 is when you've got Auburn left out. 2011, you end up with LSU and Alabama. And I think that for like historical purposes, it could have been huge because the final BCS standings in 2011, yes, we always talk about Oklahoma State at the number 3 spot, but Stanford at number 4. I mean, if you were to let that Cardinal team into a college football playoff scenario, I don't think that Stanford at the 4 would beat that LSU team at the 1, but that LSU team at the 1, the way that they played, the way that they won games, I'm not positive that they would blow out that Stanford team. So the 2004 and 2011 stand out because of, what they meant to the, conversation around college football and the eventual expansion into the college football playoff era. So those are the ones that without a doubt stood out to me.
See, I thought 2004 was the obvious answer because of Auburn, but like the 4 seed that year wouldn't have been great. For me, the one that was most interesting to me was the year before. I liked 2003 because that was a year where, like, in 2004, it was 3 undefeated teams. In 2003, it was 3 one-loss teams. Like, it was USC, LSU, and Oklahoma. And USC's loss was a triple overtime loss to Cal. LSU lost to Florida in early October, and Oklahoma, got its butt kicked by Kansas State in the Big 12 title game. And, the recency bias was not evident that year because Oklahoma still got into the title game and it lost obviously to LSU 21-14. And I think one of the more boring title games that I can remember, but Michigan finished 4th that year and USC then was named national. I think they played Alabama. Who did USC play? It was Alabama. I think they won. They were named the AP champion. Obviously, the coaches poll named LSU the champion because that's how it worked with the BCS. So the BCS was designed to get rid of split champions, and then only a few years in, we had a split champion. So I think that USC, LSU, Oklahoma, and Michigan was the team that finished 4th. I think that would have been a pretty good year to have a playoff. I still think LSU probably wins it in the end, but I'm not sure Oklahoma does really deserve to be in there because I think that USC team was better than that Oklahoma team that year.
That wasn't the Iowa team that wasn't the USC team that smoked Iowa in the Orange Bowl?
I think it was. Oh, God, let me check.
Does Oklahoma...
Iowa fans love me, so I just want to make sure that if we can point out that Iowa got blown out in the BCS game, we should do so. But I'm trying to remember USC playing Bama, but I thought that was the year USC crushed Iowa with Brad Banks at Iowa and Carson Palmer's last year at USC.
38-17.
Okay.
Or no. Hold on. No, it was no, in 2004 they didn't go to that. That was 2003. That was the 2002 season. So no.
Got it. Okay.
So in 03 and 08, Oklahoma played an SEC team in the BCS national championship game, and both games were low scoring. And I was just going to ask, just off the top of my mind, I don't remember being in Was that 08 game exciting to you all? Because I think I remember being bored as well. Because what we got from Oklahoma was not obviously not representative of what we had seen from the Sooners the entire year. A credit to Florida's defense, but it's like, was that the same storyline that was just put in motion once again, where you run into this SEC defense of future NFL players and they just understand that they can win 21-14 for the LSU game, 24-14 for the Florida game, where the highlights are very few and far between. I felt like that was a wrinkle of the SEC's dominance in the BCS era, was that the title games just weren't all that entertaining.
Well, I mean, you think of Oklahoma now and you look at their first starts in the BCS. It was like they had the 13-2 win over Florida State. They had the 21-14 loss to LSU. There was the 55-19 game in which they were blown out. But then, that 24-14 game against Florida, like they were the low scoring, boring team, which if you compare it to now, what Oklahoma games have looked like in the playoff.
They were also used to having played the spread in the Big 12, whereas Urban Meyer sort of brought that style of spread to the SEC. So I feel like they had seen that before, and both teams played really good defense there. I thought the 03 game, where was it Justin Vincent, I think, ran wild for LSU. He was a freshman, and they ended up beating him, or ran wild by that game standards, was interesting.
Oh, you know what?
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm interrupting you. No, going back to the 2004 season, USC played Michigan in the Rose Bowl that year. So we kind of had the top four playing each other. It was just the wrong seeds. My bad. Anyways.
I would like to see 2000, actually. So Oklahoma wins the national title that year, right? Big 12 champion. They ended up playing Florida State in the title game. They beat them. FSU only scored 2 points on a safety. That was when Mark Richt was leaving for Georgia. I think we've had that discussion on this podcast before. But there were two other teams that I think were basically on the same level as both those teams that year. So Miami was 10-1, Big East champion, and Washington was also 10-1, Pac-10 champion in a decent Pac-10, if I recall that year. You also had 10-1 Virginia Tech and 10-1 Oregon State.
Oh, hell yeah, Oregon State. Let's go.
Was that Reeser maybe for that? Or I forgot who was the QB for Oregon State back then.
I mean, was it Jonathan Smith? The man is young enough that it really could have been Jonathan Smith.
So Washington had actually beaten Miami that year, and Miami had beaten Florida State. Remember the controversy, Danny? Like, should Florida State get in over Miami, even though Miami beat them? But Miami had lost to Washington. I forgot who Washington lost to, but you had 1 12-0 and 3 pretty legitimate 10-1s, and then 2 other 10-1s who, if you really squinted, you could make a case for. Like 2000, I think, would have been a pretty interesting playoff year, and you'd have great regional diversity. I mean, 2 from Florida, but also Oklahoma and Washington.
It was.
I think
Jonathan
what's interesting
Smith
too.
Yes.
I think what's interesting too, when you talk about this discussion in general, like which one do you wish you had 4 teams, is which one do you think might have changed the outcome? Like if there would have possibly been a different champion for me, and I'm not saying it would have been a different champion, but the 2011 season, hands down for me, that season drove me nuts. And that's it was one of my first years in the media. And that's when I got pegged as like this anti-SEC guy. But to me, it was more of, and I know, and I've rehashed this argument 1,000 times. Well, how is Alabama's home loss against LSU in a 9-6 game, like in Oklahoma State's loss versus Iowa State, a bad Iowa State team? Like, and we started comparing losses, which seemed like such a loser argument to me. Like, well, like Oklahoma State had reasons that year too, emotional reasons with the plane crash and all these other things. And yet we just pointed to the dominance of the SEC and said, well, Alabama's got the eye test. We're going to put them back in. We want to see this rematch. But that to me is the season that I would have loved to seen the 4 teams there.
Who is your 4th?
Looking back at that season, I'd put Stanford in there.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you're going to go. I mean, obviously you wouldn't go Arkansas with 3 SEC West teams.
Right.
Maybe Oregon, but
Stanford was a 1-loss team that year.
Stanford didn't win their conference.
They didn't win the conference. Yeah,
Oregon won at 11-2.
Yeah. You also had 10-2 Arkansas.
Right.
In the definitely ain't going 3 SEC West teams. In case you didn't know.
All right. This next question. Let's see. It's a long one. So we got plenty of preface here. Love the pod. I'm a Mississippi State fan who's obsessed with the sport at a national scale, and Cover 3 is always a go-to for insight. Danny and Bud have been great additions to the show over the last year. Give y'all some of the most well-rounded coverage by any CFB pod. R.I.P. Barton, not dead, and Hail State. My question today is about Wisconsin. The Badgers have had a program knocking on the doorstep of breaking through for a while now. They consistently reach the Big Ten title game, and in 2017 were a win away from making the playoff. Unfortunately for them, their talent level simply isn't there to win at the highest level. And while they can occasionally play Ohio State close, they've yet to be able to pull out a win. While I'm aware this is pretty much as well as Wisconsin can do within the current landscape of the Big Ten, it has been mentioned that with Paul Chryst beginning to up the Badgers recruiting level, perhaps that breakthrough could be on the way. But what I'm wondering is if there's another small change that Wisconsin should make: their offense. I know it's total sacrilege in Madison to suggest breaking away from the formula for success that Barry Alvarez laid out decades ago, and that plan has served the Badgers well. But it's just the reality that in modern college football, the old school 3 yards in a cloud of dust offensive approach and relying on your defense isn't enough anymore. That may suffice to winning Big Ten West titles, but it clearly puts them at a disadvantage when facing elite teams. Obviously, talent is the most important thing, and Wisconsin is working to improve that. But if they really want to take the next step, should they not look at modernizing their offense?
Can I rant here?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
There isn't a next step. The chance that you go up if you change something up like this is massively smaller than the chance that you go down because you're trying to do the same thing that the elite teams do. We talk about if Texas A&M wants to take the next step, they have to be able to throw knockout punches through the air and actually not be 98th, 118th, and 99th in passing explosiveness. But you know what we don't say? Texas A&M wins 9-10 games doing what they do, playing good defense, running the football. You can win a lot of games like that. Now, for Texas A&M, there is a next step to take, I think, in theory, although I'm willing to acknowledge that 100-something years of history with no titles, maybe I'm missing something there. For Wisconsin, with their recruiting base, there is not a next step. They are awesome because they hit their ceiling constantly. There is not a next step to take. Like, they are never close to having a national championship caliber roster, ever. Like, I do the blue chip ratio, and it's expansive as hell. A lot of smart people think it's way too expansive. Even as expansive as it is, and it's probably too inclusive, Wisconsin never sniffs that. They cannot get national championship quality players at Wisconsin. Like, there ain't no next step to take, guys. Be happy with what you have and keep kicking ass with what you have.
Yeah, I mostly agree with that. First of all, great question. I love the way it was phrased. I love the way it was posed. Just all around wonderful question. I think that for the most part, yeah, Wisconsin has probably reached its ceiling unless there's some sort of strange recruiting renaissance in Madison that sees a bunch of 5-star players flocking north to Madison to play football. I don't see any reason for them to change because this is one of those situations where you're having a lot of success as it is. And now it's kind of like, okay, well, what are you hoping to get? Kind of like Bud said, you've kind of hit your ceiling in that you're more likely to regress than you are to go forward if you change anything up. That said, Wisconsin's offense did look a little different last year.
Graham Mertz might be the piece here where, like, the quarterback, all of a sudden you start to say, okay, I can start to see how this moves. Because that first performance from Graham Mertz on that Friday night, I mean, that couldn't have just been an Illinois thing, right, Tom?
Against an awesome Illinois defense.
Who was that against again?
Illinois.
Shots fired.
Illinois' defense did that for a lot of quarterbacks last year, but just overall, the Wisconsin offense last year, like, this is a team that in 2019 ran the ball 62% of the time. Last year, they ran the ball 57% of the time. And I think Mertz has a part of that because this was a team that, for its entire history as being what we understand of Wisconsin as right now, it's like, run the ball, play good defense, and, don't screw it up. Lots of play action for the quarterbacks, but it's mostly, game manager type stuff, tight ends, and take some deep shots once in a while when they're there. But I do think that they feel that they've got a bit more dynamism at the QB position with Mertz, and maybe we'll see them open things up a little bit as far as being more pass heavy. But I don't think they're gonna change what they are at their core, which is a good defensive team that runs the ball and takes care of the football and tries to beat you up physically.
Don't you think we saw Michigan try to modernize its offense and it hasn't been exactly a smashing success?
No, it hasn't. But I do think that it makes more
Quarterback.
sense for Michigan.
Michigan
Yeah.
has the ability to get there talent-wise.
So I think modernize is, if that's another word for evolve, I think there are tweaks you can make, and you guys both all hit on this, that last year we did see a little bit of a different looking. There were new schemes implemented, and part of that is because Graham Mertz, I believe, but he's the highest ranked quarterback they've had there, right? A 4-star.
Yeah, and it is worth noting, guys, that they have the last 2 recruiting classes they've signed are the 2 best classes they have ever signed. So they are recruiting better under Paul Chryst. They are nowhere near recruiting what you need to win a national title. Like, that was my point. Like, the next step is what, losing 1 fewer game a year, maybe?
But they could be recruiting more at a level where the Big Ten West doesn't become as open as it usually is.
Yes, that I can agree with. That
And
could be
while
the next step.
There's got to be a shuffle before winning a national championship for Wisconsin, right? Because like it can't be a step, but could it be a shuffle to where you are competitive, where you beat Ohio State from time to time, where it becomes
Or an
more of a
asteroid that
rivalry?
knocks out like the Eastern
You know,
Division.
No,
like
I mean, I think that like the way that they're recruiting, like I said, I think that maybe they're widening the gap with everybody else a little bit in the West. So I think that they are raising their floor in that they're increasing their chance of winning the division on a yearly basis. And if you're winning the division, that's giving you more shots at Ohio State in the Big Ten championship, which mathematically increases your chance of at some point beating Ohio State, winning the conference, and maybe getting a playoff berth. But I think if Wisconsin ever reaches the playoff, it'll probably be as the 4 seed, and it'll probably be as the team nobody's betting on in that semifinal.
In a year that Ohio State is having a down year.
Yeah.
Yes. But hey, that's a step. I mean,
Right.
that's one more college football playoff
It's a
appearance.
step
than
most
they have
programs
right
don't
now.
have it's a step most programs don't have a faintest hope of achieving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's only, 4 teams have 20 of the 28. So I guess we're only dealing with like 11 or 12 teams that have even got a college football playoff appearance so far in 7 years. So that would be something for the Badgers. After a 7-month war of attrition, it's the match the world has been waiting for. Manchester City and Chelsea, the UEFA Champions League final. The champions! It's Saturday, May 29th, 3 p.m. Eastern time, streaming live on Paramount Plus. The Europa League final was bananas. It went all the way to penalty kicks, all the way through 10 for 10. The goalies had to take kicks. Sorry, Man U. That was embarrassing. But you are going to be dialed in to Man City and Chelsea Saturday, May 29th, the Champions League final, streaming live on Paramount Plus, paramountplus.com/UCL to start your free trial today. That's right. We've been telling you about the mountain of entertainment on Paramount Plus, all the different ways that you can watch the CBS sports events on Paramount Plus. If for some reason you haven't signed up, this Champions League final is the opportunity to start your free trial and watch Manchester City and Chelsea from Portugal. Visit paramountplus.com/UCL. Again, this Saturday, May 29th, 3 p.m. Eastern time, Man City and Chelsea, the Champions League final.
Bet on Man City.
That was bananas. Huh? You said, bet on Man City?
Yeah.
Is that just, I mean, they're the best club in the world.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
anything more? Like,
I'm not betting the match because I've already got my Man City future, so that's fine for me enough. But also, if you could find it at your book, again, this is the level of degeneracy I dive into. If you could find the total amount of yellow and red cards, like if it's a range, go 4 to 6. If it's just over under at your book, go over 4.5.
By the way, can we shout out Chip for his professionalism yesterday, throwing to commercial break as soon as Tom dropped the red card nugget, so we could all mute and go bet it.
That's right.
Like that 90 seconds was perfect.
Yep. Sadly, it did not hit. We
did.
We were handing out some yellows. Yeah.
We came close.
All right. Next question. Great pod as always, and a must follow for anyone interested in learning more about college football or simply want some betting tips. Question. With the betting lines released last week, many around the country have started to discuss the best games of the year upcoming. However, I was wondering, what game do you think is the most important, parentheses, most at stake for teams/conferences, close parentheses? I think it has to be Oregon versus Ohio State. Oregon needs that win, not only for the program, but also for the Pac-12. Ohio State with a loss loses some wiggle room to make yet another playoff. So what is the most important? These things say games of the year, and because it's games of the year, there's going to be all the big brand names, all the big kickoff games. But when we're talking about the most important games in terms of teams and conferences, which ones stand out from the 2021 schedule?
I love it. I love the way he phrased it too, because biggest games of the year, like Georgia Clemson, is awesome, but it is meaningless, right? I mean, either team could win or lose that game, and it's probably not going to make a difference to their playoff hopes, right? It's an awesome game.
Bet on the loser. Bet on the loser to win the national championship.
Right, exactly. That's your time to buy low. I had circled another game, similar matchup. That one I do think is interesting. That one did cross my mind, the Oregon-Ohio State game, for what it means to the Pac-12. But I think it's the Washington-Michigan game. Similar matchup, Pac-12 versus the Big Ten. But because of Harbaugh and the impact that it could have on him if they lose that game, the perception of the Pac-12, all those things matter as well. But I think that game has massive implications for both programs.
Yeah, I think well as with the questioner, again, great question. I think that those two games are huge for the Pac-12 in particular, because if Oregon can beat Ohio State and Washington can beat Michigan, even if it's, the national perception of Michigan isn't what it used to be, that's still a huge statement, I think, for the Pac-12. And I think that is the kind of narrative that if those teams continue to go on to have a playoff-worthy season, or USC or somebody else has a playoff-worthy season, those are the kind of wins that can change the actual perception of the Pac-12. So I think those are huge games. I think another very important game besides those is the Alabama A&M game. And because I think that that's a situation where it's kind of like the Georgia Clemson game. The result is going to matter, obviously, but how that result looks, I think, will have an impact too, because we've already seen, non-division winners in the SEC reach the playoff. And it's kind of like a Georgia Clemson situation where, depending on how the season goes, and that game is early enough in the season where I'm not sure the loser is eliminated. So I think that is going to be a game that towards the end of the season, when we're starting to try to figure out who that number 4 team is and who that number 5 team is, it's a premonition that game is going to be coming up a lot. Because if Texas A&M is sitting there with one loss and it was a close loss to Alabama, there's going to be a lot of people arguing that Texas A&M deserves that number 4 seed.
I'm actually going to go with Georgia Clemson for this reasons. First, I don't know that I really see Oregon as that legitimate of a playoff contender, but if they won that game, you have to consider them so. But their over-under for wins is 9, which means that Vegas is still expecting them to lose 2 games in the Pac-12 in addition to losing to Ohio State, which that number is getting bet up every day. So, is Oregon really a playoff team? Maybe they can be, maybe not. They're in that sort of second tier of possibles for me. But with Clemson, Georgia, if you win that game, you essentially get a mulligan to get into the playoff. You can lose a game because you have such a quality win in your back pocket. If Clemson loses that, Clemson wins, they can do that thing where they lose to Pitt on some freaky stuff and still get in. We've seen this movie before. If Georgia wins, they could lose to Alabama close in the title game and still have a very convincing argument that they deserve to go, even as a non-champion. So I think just for the mulligan that it takes away, it's pretty important.
October 2nd, South Bend, Indiana, Cincinnati.
Let's go
to play Notre Dame.
Let's go. 3-0 Cincinnati with a win over Indiana.
Indiana is like the sort of like move here that could definitely trigger it. But if they beat Indiana and they show up to play Notre Dame, here's what the rest of the schedule looks like. Temple and UCF, both at home. Navy, Tulane, Tulsa, USF, SMU, ECU. We will see whether Cincinnati can handle playing with fire all the way down. But if you want to have the real group of, because I think Cincinnati will start high enough in the AP poll that it will have a much higher floor. You're not going to have to climb and jump ahead of a whole bunch of power conference teams to be able to move up the mental power rankings that we all have, that pollsters have. And yes, all of that is going to influence the opinions of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, which won't release their rankings for like another month. So Cincinnati at Notre Dame, October 2nd. If the Bearcats can get that win, then I think we've at least got an earnest debate. It's not a debate that's going to be just because you want to see chaos or just because you want to see a first in the college football playoff era. It will be one where those two quality wins potentially could make it very interesting. But again, I follow that quickly by saying they will have to prove it, because while they're going to be favored all the rest of the way, they're college athletes playing with fire and expectations down the stretch. So I think that would be an awesome storyline. And in terms of like what it could mean for the entire college football picture, if Cincinnati loses that game, it's done. Like, we're out. It's
the Tom
probably not
Fornelli Bowl. That's the Fornelli Bowl.
I just want to be clear here. So, Chip, the most important game of the season with the biggest stakes in your mind is the game between the team nobody's expecting to be a playoff contender this year after all they lost, and a team that actually has zero chance of ever being in the college football playoff. I just want to be clear.
It's called contributing to the conversation. So you just don't say ditto. Yes, the listener got one. This other one. Like it's called rounding it out so that we can put a button on this thing and keep it moving. Sorry, bud. You want to say something?
Well, I actually think Chip might be onto something here, because it's not the most impactful for the playoff race.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the sort of dominoes it could set off, you guys realize in the preseason odds here, USC and Cincinnati have the exact same spread on the road at Notre Dame. They are both 3.5-point dogs. If the Irish beat the Trojans, and the guy that Mike Bone used to employ at Cincinnati, Luke Fickell, goes in there and beats them with Cincinnati, guys,
yeah, we could see. Do you immediately flip? You've said that. God, man, we're back at it again. So USC is a coach away. Is Luke Fickell that coach?
I think it's probably James Franklin, but
like if you were to pick, if you're a USC fan, that's at the top of your board.
Yeah.
I mean, I think as far as coaches go, Franklin's on there. I think Fickell's definitely on there. It's just, I don't, like we've talked about before, I just don't know that USC is like the job Fickell's waiting for.
Very interesting.
Also, since he is favored at Indiana.
Since he is the favorite at Indiana.
They're favored on the road at Indiana.
I always thought that one of the jobs
Danny.
that Fickell was waiting for was in South Bend. And it was like, I'm cool to hang here at Cincinnati. Then Notre Dame can go hire Cincinnati's coach again.
That's the Danny Bowl right there.
Exactly. That's the
Cincinnati
load up on the
favored
Hoosiers let's go.
against Danny's beloved Hoosiers.
Coming up on the other side, we've got another coach who's been entrenched for a long time. We discussed him a lot here on the coach rankings, and we've got a fan that is a little bit curious about what might happen after that coach decides to hang it up. Next. This question comes from Hawks by a Million. New listener, and I love the show. Love the gambling aspects that are sprinkled in and everyone's knowledge of the whole landscape of college football. My question is, if Kirk Ferentz leaves Iowa in the next 5 years, who would be the potential candidates for the job? Would they go from the Hayden Fry tree with the Stoops brother or a Bielema, or would they go with an outside hire? Also, would the pro-style old school culture remain afterwards? Thanks, guys, and love the show.
Great question. Great. I mean, it's weird to think about who Iowa would replace Ferentz with, because he's been there for like 1,000 years. But it's kind of like Wisconsin, where I feel like the blueprint's in place. Like Ferentz came from Fry's tree. Fry's when it kind of started it all. I'd have to think that whoever they replace Ferentz with is going to be somebody who's familiar with the program in some way and is familiar with how things have worked for the last 20 years or so, because they're going to want to keep that going. And so I don't think it's going to be some outside hire. It might be a hot up and coming hot shot, as in it's a young assistant on the staff, but I think it's going to be a name most Iowa fans are already familiar with.
What about Jim from Wisconsin, the defense coordinator?
Jim Leonard.
Jim Leonard.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out, but I think he's more likely to take over at Wisconsin than he is at Iowa. And I think that if you're Iowa, do you want to hire Jim Leonard and sit there and be like, is he just going to leave for Wisconsin if that job comes open any second?
I also thought the question was phrased interestingly. It kind of posed it as keeping old school culture and old school pro style offense. And I'm not sure that those are tied together necessarily. I think you could keep one or both or neither.
For the stylistically, you still want the corn-fed boys in the line of scrimmage.
Yes.
I mean, that's like whatever you do has to involve imposing physicality with the players that you have recruited from your area and developed in your program to build them up into some big beef. I mean, we're not going skinny wide splits at Iowa.
This thing runs on ethanol, baby.
Yeah. Stylistically, that has to be a part of it because that's just smart and taking advantage of your surroundings. Is Bielema a Fry assistant?
Yeah.
Okay.
He played for Fry, and then he was on the staff there with Ferentz, and Bill Snyder, who was part of that whole Hayden Fry, Bielema was on that staff. So he's part of that tree for sure.
You nervous for Iowa? Bidding war in 3 years?
No, I think Bert knows where the real football is going to be played from now on.
Is Iowa? How selective can they be? Will they have the pick? I mean, what tier job do you think this is? Like a second tier below the top 15 jobs? Below that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a solid Big Ten program, which is going to elevate it over a lot of programs. But I mean, I would say it's solid tier 2, but I could also hear arguments for tier 3, like the very top of tier 3. So, I mean, it's really going to depend on the coach. And I think that it is kind of like, for some coaches, will probably look at Iowa like, God, no, why the hell would I ever want to coach there? But for some, it make more sense.
You mentioned something. I think I've realized, I hadn't come to this realization before, but we don't get to really know how good a job is until it's open. And so for these jobs that are held by one coach for a really long time, how good of a job is it? TBD. I mean, we haven't really gotten to test the market in terms of seeing what caliber of candidates are interested, tied to the job, what that candidate pool looks like. It could be a great, depending on what people think of Iowa, I think it could be a top 15 job. Absolutely. But I can't say that with any kind of certainty because they haven't gotten out there on the market to make a run at a Mark Stoops, make a run at a Brett Bielema, make a run at probably Jay Norvell. Ooh, There you go. That'd be a good one from Nevada.
You guys want to go viral?
Yes.
All right, Chip, re-ask the question, who should replace Ferentz?
So 5 years from now, let's say 5 years from now, Kirk Ferentz decides he's going to hang up the whistle. Who 5 years from now should be Iowa's next head coach?
Matt Campbell. All right, now clip that and put it on Twitter.
Ooh, that could work. Like he knows how to recruit the area. Iowa has more resources than Iowa State. Mm-hmm. Like his scheme is very within himself.
Better
Competition's
school,
really low in the Big Ten West. School
better
district.
logo, better stadium, just better in every single way.
If Mark Stoops is willing to leave Kentucky to go to Iowa, then it's a better job than maybe some think. If they end up with Jay Norvell, then it's maybe a little bit lower than you might think.
Also, the money for these Big Ten jobs, to me, makes it so that you really can't put them that low. Like it was like, hey, where could I win at? Where would I have fun at? Where would be sexy to coach at? But if you're a coach, the money does matter. And it's like fans are like, hey, what's the difference between 3 million and 4 million? $4 million. About $1 million. Yeah.
5%.
Yeah, right. So, I think a lot of these Big Ten jobs, even though you can't win the big one at them, and it's hard to recruit to them, they're still really good jobs because you're getting your family is set for life if you get one contract at one of these, basically.
Was it one contract? Well, Iowa's not a one contract job, but I always
certainly not.
I built on your one contract job theory, and now I call them savings account jobs, or retirement funds. You're going to be fired, but if you save your money, you make it stretch. And in a lot of these college towns, that money can stretch pretty far, not to mention the kind of perks that you would get. Eat all your meals at the meal table and at the restaurants where you get the free dinners. And then all of a sudden, you find yourself with a fully funded retirement thanks to your buyout checks.
Unless you have like a Coke or, adultery habit, it's hard to go broke making $4 or $5 million in a college town, man. There's just not that much money to spend your money on.
I lost a lot of games for this beach house.
Yeah. There's all those moments when you're at the post-game press conference and you're so sick of being asked what you're going to do to address the offensive line or get stops on defense. You're just thinking to yourself, like, new deck on the beach house. New deck on the beach house. Yeah. All right. Any other suggestions for who would replace Kirk Ferentz at Iowa?
Paul Christ.
What about Freeman, the DC at Notre Dame? Did a great job at Cincinnati.
I feel like Marcus Freeman is going to be a head coach somewhere soon. I don't know if Iowa is going to be open soon enough for him, because I think he's going to be a Power 5 coach here somewhere soon. I think the Big Ten. I mean, like, oh God, let's go crazy speculation. Let's say Purdue disappoints this year. Jeff Brom gets canned. I think he'd be a great option at Purdue or jobs like that. So I don't think he'll be around long enough to replace Ferentz before he gets another job first.
Gotcha.
Is he the top Power 5 coordinator that is carrying that like in line to jump up and become a head coach soon?
I mean, unless Notre Dame's defense tanks this year, I think so. Yeah.
True.
You think over Grinch or Tony Elliott?
No. Well, see, that's the thing with Tony Elliott. It's like, when it comes to Clemson assistants, they get paid so well. It's like, unless the absolute perfect job that they want comes along, they tend to be okay sticking around.
How are Iowa's academics?
Pretty. God, it's so weird because they're
not like Notre Dame, Michigan level. Okay,
no, but they're pretty solid Big Ten level.
I think Grinch, because he has more P5 experience.
Yeah,
he's probably ahead of Freeman. Freeman, having done 1 year, this will be his first year in the P5. I don't know. I think Grinch probably over him for right now.
Grinch for DCs and Tony Elliott for OCs. I wasn't necessarily trying to rank them, but I was instead looking for that. Just like what's that group look like? The group that seems to be on the launch pad. Where I mean, Tony Elliott reportedly was interviewing for big time Power 5 jobs, this last go round, decided to stay put. I think Alex Grinch is a great suggestion for somebody who might be on the move. You even mentioned that with the, if Grinch leaves, that would be a landing spot for like a Justin Wilcox, something like that. That was a good point. All right. Next question. Love the pod. I, like most of the college football nation, thought Scott Frost would do well at Nebraska. However, I think it's fair to say he has fallen short of expectations. If he doesn't rebound, how do you think the fan base would respond to Jeff Monken? Return of the triple. Go Vols.
Why not do the perfect thing? Bring in Monken to run your offense, keep Scott Frost to be the former player that's there. And then you could bring Tommy Frazier back to be the quarterback coach and just relive the glory days. Just make it all go.
And then Phillips is life coach.
I mean, I'm obviously a huge proponent for more Power 5 programs to run the option. I don't know if I think Nebraska is a program that really needs to run the option or should consider it. I think they still have enough brand recognition where they can recruit well, obviously, and they've got the facilities and they've got all that. My thing more, though, is I'm becoming more and more, and this kind of goes back to the Ferentz question about who should replace him and as far as changing up the formula. I'm becoming more and more convinced that, particularly in the Big Ten West, spreading things out and getting a bunch of fast guys from Florida and Texas and all that kind of stuff just isn't working. Like, if you look through the history of the Big Ten, aside from Ohio State, who has more talent than everybody, what's the program that kind of just spread things out, went more of an up-tempo offense that succeeded?
Purdue.
But have they?
Under Tiller.
I'm saying, but in the last...
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And that was more of an air raid. You know what I mean? It's like, so I'm just becoming more... I think that Nebraska's next coach, if there is a next coach, maybe not go back to the option, but they might want to consider more the Iowa-Wisconsin model.
Stylistically, what would you say Penn State has been? Because it's not been crazy tempo.
Talent level, though. Outside of the blue chip talent schools, Like if you have that kind of talent, you can run whatever the hell you want. But I'm just saying week in and week out in the Big Ten, the teams that don't have that talent tend to have a blueprint for what works with what you can recruit in that part of the country, the players that are available to you. Like you can go into Florida, you can go into Texas, you can dip into California, you can find some guys that fit maybe that, the speed guys, but it's hard to find a program that's had consistent success doing that in the last 20 years in the Big Ten that isn't one of the blue bloods.
Tom, it's really hard to disagree with you on that. I still think if everybody's doing one thing and you do something different, you may have a schematic advantage. I just think if you're going to hire an option coach, it's a hard hire to make because you're basically admitting that you are not going to play for it all. And we can all sit here and think Nebraska is not going to play for it all, guys. Like that era is not coming back. And
Nebraska's not doing that though. Yeah.
Correct. Their fans and boosters are not willing to admit that, hey man, we're playing for Big Ten West titles. We're not playing to actually have a chance to win the playoff. Even though they haven't won the Big Ten West in they won the one,
since
right?
It was the legends or leaders. I can't remember which one it was.
They didn't win the Big Ten West. They were either a legend or a leader. I just remember Taylor Martinez showing up in the Big Ten title game.
I remember sitting up in the press box watching Melvin Gordon run the same fly sweep 85 times in Nebraska, never once figuring out how to, it's coming. Here it goes. There he goes. Bye. Yeah.
Melvin Gordon runs for like 300 yards or something like that in that Big Ten title game, Wisconsin and Nebraska. And because we brought that one back when then ex LSU defensive coordinator Bo Pelini was getting torched by Mississippi State. Everyone's like, hey, bud, remember when they couldn't stop that one play back then? He didn't adjust then. This one might be a pretty long day. That reminder, if you want to jump in on a future mailbag episode, you could do so by leaving a 5-star review. Listen, there were some great questions. Tom told you there were fantastically worded questions. He really appreciated them. And then put in your question within that review. You can follow him on Twitter at Tom Fornelli. You can follow him at Danny Cannell. You can follow him at Bud Elliott 3. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.